And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. I would like to welcome everyone wherever you are joining us from. It's always good to be on with you, wonderful people. I have said over and over again that, without our people, uh, we don't have a show, we don't have a struggle, and the people are important. Welcome, welcome. It's the last day of February, and the year is moving as quickly as one would expect at this time of the year. You know, you want the year to move fast because it's the beginning of the year. Well, 2 months have gone, and we are going into the month of March. Tonight, we are going to have Hamilton Greene on, former Prime Minister, former Mayor of Georgetown, long-standing member of the People's National Congress. We're going to have a one-on-one interview with him. He's expected to join us shortly. So please share the link. Make sure that everyone knows that Politics 101 is on. Good evening to all of you. Good evening, Guyana. Good evening to you in the diaspora, whether you are in North America, the wider Caribbean, the wider South America, whether you're in Europe or Africa. Welcome to Politics 101. As I said, tonight we're going to have Hamilton Greene on, former Prime Minister and former Mayor of Georgetown, long-standing member of the People's National Congress, so confidant of Forbes Burnham. So Hammy needs no introduction. I don't know why I'm going on and on and on and on. But he will be here shortly. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Politics 101. We ended last night, of course, with that famous song by the Wailers. The Wailers, I think Mr. Greene is trying to get on here. Hello? Yes. Right. You probably can sign out and try coming in back again. That may probably help. Oh, you did that already. Okay. All right. Okay. We are waiting for you. Thanks. Yes, Hamilton Greene there. So he's backstage. A little technical difficulty sometimes in getting on to these shows. We ended last night with that famous song by the Wailers, Small Axe. If you are the big tree, we are the small axe, sharpened to cut you down. And all of us know the story of David and Goliath in the Bible. And that this government is behaving big and large, doing what it wants. Last night we drew attention to Ipadaji, denying Ipadaji the use of a government building to hold a forum on land. Well, imagine you are taking away lands from Black people. And then when they meet to discuss their land issues, you tell them they can't meet in a government building. Not Freedom House. They're not asking you for Freedom House. They're not asking you to use your big houses in Pradoville. They're asking for the use of a public school building, and they were denied that use. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. If you're just joining us, we're expecting Hamilton Greene to join us shortly so that we can talk to him about a range of issues from Republic to Burnham to what's happening today. We come on here tonight, and we just learned that the court yesterday, the High Court, has given Ipadaji and the government time to resolve the issue of the subvention. You would remember that Ipadaji had gone to court after the government took away the subvention. And the Chief Justice was dismayed that the matter even went to court. And yesterday, when they got to court, the court gave them time to resolve the matter. Anil Nandalal, appearing for the government, assured the court that the proposals to resolve the matter would lead to a resolution. I see Brother Hammy on, so we're going to get him on shortly. So the Chief Justice said that she's giving them until March the 23rd to resolve the issue. Nandlal said that he's confident that the issue would be resolved. Nigel Hughes, appearing for Ipadaji, told the court that he had sent weeks ago, they had sent a message to the AG asking for them to meet to resolve the matter. He only got a response on Saturday. And between Saturday and Monday, he did not have time to meet with the AG. First of all, this note was sent weeks ago. The Attorney General only replied on Saturday. The Chief Justice again said she prefers the matter to be settled out of court. In the first place, why the subvention was taken away? And as far as I'm concerned, nothing short of the return of the subvention under the conditions in which it was given would suffice. We don't know what the government has up its sleeves, but we are saying publicly, Ipadaji should settle for nothing short of this return of the subvention. We're also coming on air tonight, getting news that a vote of no confidence was passed against the REO of Region 4. You all remember that nasty altercation where the REO got into an altercation with the regional chairman over whether Kathy Hughes should speak at the Republic activity they had in Region 4. The REO didn't want her to speak. And I think he moved and was trying to snatch the microphone from the regional chairman, Daniel Siram. Well, they met today, and the APNU side moved a vote of no confidence against the REO, not just for its behavior on the eve of the Republic celebration, but also for what they call unaccountability. According to the motion, lots of monies which were allocated, the REO has not been reporting. He has not been reporting how these monies are being spent. So we have an REO who is not accounting for monies being spent. And so they moved the motion of no confidence against him. Little gymnastics there. The AFC seconded the motion. They spoke on the motion, but they abstained. My goodness. They abstained, If you second the motion, it's your part of your motion. And, they abstained. We understand that, according to reports, the AFC did not want a vote of no confidence. They preferred a censure. But however, the vote of no confidence was carried. I don't know what happens now, since a vote of no confidence was carried against the REO. The REO walked out of the meeting and the PPP councillors walked out behind him. So open collusion between the REO and the PPP councillors, my goodness me. These are the people who used to cuss Burnham about Paramonsi. It's one of the things that I find so comical with the PPP. They keep talking about Burnham this and Burnham authoritarianism, and those of us who fought against Burnham's authoritarianism, we are now colluding with the PNC. Well, if Burnham was authoritarian and we fought against Burnham's authoritarianism, then that is done. Why are we fighting against authoritarianism today? If you say you had badness in the past, well, we get rid of the badness. Why we have to deal with the badness today? I said last night that I think all the governments in Guyana, except the coalition government, all of them, PPP, PNC, all of them cannot, or none of them can escape the charge of excesses. In fact, none of the governments in post-colonial Caribbean, none, including the revolutionary government in Grenada, which was supposed to be an alternative, none of them could escape charges of political excess. None of them could afford charges of some degree of authoritarianism. The only government I have exempted is the coalition government. And you all know that I have had serious problems with the coalition government. As I said last night, you can go back to the Burnham government and you can point to big things that had some transformative effect on people's lives. Free education, national service. Now, I don't deal with bridges and roads. I don't think government should take credit for those things. You have money, infrastructure is something that you have to deal with. I went to South Africa and I saw what the apartheid government did with infrastructure in that country. Massive, tremendous. But I'm not going to give the apartheid government credit. So for me, it is the transformative things I look for. And as I said, one can look at free education that would have transformed the lives of people like myself, because what free education did was to democratize education. So whether you went to QC or you went to Buxton Secondary or Linden Foundation, you got the same quality of education. That did not exist before. You had the same access to education, if I may say. And for me, that's transformative, right? You think about national sovereignty and what it did for poor people. Up to today, I hear poor people meet me and tell me, you all try and bring back the national service now when we were in government, to help these young people, transformative. I can't say the same thing of the coalition. There's nothing transformational that they did. But what they did do was to put the brake on the criminal state, was to put the brake on the authoritarian state. Nobody was assassinated during that period, whether charges or not. And I've said that. I go back to the old PNC that Ami was part of, and I'm bringing Mr. Greene on. I have to have my little say. I made the point, and I don't care who vexed with me. I was on a panel, and I think even the Indianists agree with me. They try to go wrong. That in terms of the management of our ethnic problem, the PNC did a better job than the PPP. Management, not fix. I don't think Burnham fixed the ethnic problem. I don't think Jagan fixed it. All of them may have attempted to fix it. But in terms of management of the conflict, I think the PNC did a better job than the PPP. And why I say that? Because if you look at the big eruptions of ethnic violence, I'm not talking about who started and who joined it. I'm talking about the fact that it happened. The overwhelming majority of big ethnic conflict, whether it be the 1961-64, whether it be in the wake of the 1997 elections, whether it be the thing in Boston from 2000, 2006, or now, with what's happening, they have all happened under the PPP watch. One can conclude, as I have, that in terms of managing the ethnic conflict, I think the PNC did better than the PPP. And so therefore, for me, one has to call a spade a spade. No matter where you stand on the political divide. I actively oppose the PNC. As I said, I was the victim of PNC's overreach, and the PNC was the victim of my activism. And one has to constantly put these things in context. That is why I pleaded on the program I was on with Ravi Dev and Beto Ram Ramarak that one cannot look at Burnham outside of his time and place. I'm not denying that from a certain standpoint, from where we stood in the 1970s and 80s, we felt that the PNC government was authoritarian. But was that all? And where did that authoritarianism come from? Did it come from Mars? Did it come from Russia? No. I'm arguing that Burnham, Jagan, Quayana, Rodney, Digyar, Hoyt, Hamilton Greene, all of them are products of our Guyana. And so if they're authoritarian, or they were authoritarian, and I believe they were, we have to ask ourselves as a society, what is the origin of that authoritarianism? Because if we don't understand its origins, we are not going to put a brake on it. Clearly, the PPP isn't interested in the origins of authoritarianism because it is 10 times more authoritarian than Burnham and the PNC regime. 10 times more. It means that it has not posed these philosophical questions and it has not answered them. Because when I said, let's lose the broad framework to understand Burnham, they kept going back and saying Burnham was a dictator. Burnham was a dictator. Burnham was a dictator. Burnham was a dictator. You see, when they analyzed Jagan and they said Jagan made mistakes, they analyzed Jagan from an ideological perspective. They're saying ideologically, he faltered. But when it comes to Burnham, as Ravi Dev did last night on a program, and I'm going to reply to him, he said that Burnham was driven by personal ambition. Well, show me a politician that's not driven by personal ambition. Show me one anywhere in the world. And so the analysis of Burnham starts from this conclusion that he was driven by personal ambition. And so therefore, whatever success he had in government doesn't count because it was all about personal ambition. This is the hypocrisy and dishonesty that we are getting from our brothers and sisters on the other side. The totality of Burnham is the totality of his excesses. And I am talking about the totality of his entire praxis. And I think until we do that, we are going no place in Guyana. Until we start from the point that if the majority of Black people think that Burnham is a hero, the other side may not like Burnham, but to question or denigrate the relationship between Black people and Burnham, I think is terrible. In a sense, what they're doing is saying to Black people, you cannot determine your leaders. We in the WPA, we have never questioned the Indians when we were in alliance with the PPP against the PNC. We never questioned their sense of victimhood. We took that and we didn't agree with some of it, but we never questioned them. They're no questioning the relationship of African Guyanese to Burnham. I gave the story and I'm going to bring Ami in now after this. When we were forming the APNU, and don't let people fool you about things. The APNU was formed by the WPA and the PNC. They got no other party. The other party, they come in. The moment was the resolution of a deep conflict between two tendencies in Guyana that started in 1974. Well, it started in 71 when Guyana left or broke ties with the PNC. What happened after then is that a new political outfit representing an alternative politics. The conflict between the PNC and the PPP was superseded. There was now a conflict between the PNC and this new formation. In a sense, as Gordon Rollaire, who just died, and who Ami would know, said it was a conflict between fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. Rodney had gotten a scholarship when Burnham was education minister. And this conflict lasted for almost 3 decades. And the formation of the APNU, in a sense, did not end the disagreement, but the open conflict that consumed the society, and in particular consumed Africans, it had come to an end. And I remember Rup Narayan and I went to West Bobis before the 2011 election, and we go, he would pick me up, I would pick him up, and we would go into the villages unannounced. And when we went into places like Belladrum and El Dorado and Seafield and Oaktown, older Africans came to us with tears in their eyes and said, thank you all. Now we don't have to choose between Burnham people and Kwayana people. Rupnarayan is not a very emotional person. But I remember when that first happened and we were driving back, he turned to me and he said, David, sometimes you engage in political struggles and you don't know how much you're agonizing people. We had no way of knowing the tremendous spiritual impact the WPA-PNC conflict was having on African Guyanese. They had to make a choice in a way that the East Indian Guyanese didn't have to make a choice between Jagan and others. Jagan was always supremo. A Burnham was challenged from Rawl Farley and Llewellyn John and Kwayana and Rodney. He always had a challenge from his left and his right. And that had an effect on people. And I will never forget those old women and older men saying to us, thanks for the APNU. Thanks. Thanks. Hamilton Greene, good evening. Ami?
Hi.
Good evening.
Well, David, your analysis is excellent. I think no one can fault it. But may I add this in terms of Burnham? We must seize Burnham's campaign, his crusade, his work, his missteps, his glorious things done in the context of a very troubling world at the time. Apart from the struggle for independence, there are two things that sort of surrounded like a cloud Burnham's work in terms of Guyana. One, the Cold War. And the trouble is, very few young people understand the impact, the import of the Cold War on countries like Guyana. And second, in the early 70s, we had to face the problem of the oil crisis, where before the crisis came, we could sell about 3 tons of sugar to secure a barrel of oil. When the crisis hit us, we had to sell 25, 26 tons of sugar to buy the same barrel of oil. And at the political level, even when we got a good deal to sell our sugar to some countries in the Far East, the PPP thought it appropriate to call a massive sugar strike to frustrate the effort to produce the sugar to earn us some money. Your analysis is flawless. And I hope that our people, all of our people, can listen to that analysis some more so that they can have the political bunks, as I say, to understand Guyana today and to recognize that we need to go forth to face the beginning of our difficulties. That is the chicanery of the old European master who brought some of us and enslaved us and had others as indentured neighbors in this country. And your work must continue so that we educate our young people so that they'll have the power to truly liberate themselves so that we can bequeath to succeeding generations a country that is free and prosperous, a country with an abundance of money these days. You can imagine if Burnham had a tidbit of the abundance of money we have today, what this country would have been. Free education, he initiated Carifesta, he ensured that the cultures were not put aside, he made Hindu, Muslim holidays, celebrations, holidays, and gave them equal status, even to the objection of certain folks. And today, what we have is an emerging oligarchy, clothed with power, they believe, and an abundance of money, who somehow feel that they can dispense with the past, fool a few people, and lord it over the rest of us. We must resist that to the last man. And as I said in a letter published sometime last week, your program and the work of others are important so we can overcome this high hurdle facing the people of this country.
Thank you, Ami, and I saw that letter. Let me take you back in history, because I heard my brother Ravi Dev last night said that Burnham was rejected by the Creole middle class, and because he was rejected by the Creole middle class, in pursuit of his own ambition, he made peace with that middle class, meaning the John Carters, etc., and in order for his pursuit. I remember, because I got to know John Carter very well in Washington. I remember one Saturday afternoon he sent for me. He had listened to a program I did, and he said, David, come. And I went over to his house and we were talking. He said, let me tell you something. My party, the UDP and the PNC Burnhamite joined largely because CLR James had come to Guyana and brought the two sides together.
Mm-hmm.
Can you recall that, Ami?
Absolutely. I was part of the effort.
There you go. There you go. So here is Ravi Dev saying the merger between Carter and Burnham was induced by Burnham ambition. And I smiled last night as I was listening to him. I said, this person really is so driven by this notion of personal ambition. He doesn't understand that, yes, the people may have personal ambition, but ultimately politics is about movement of people. And that the coalescing of C.R. Jacobs, which he didn't mention, and Bihari, and Balram Singh Rai with the Jagannite PPP took place and pushed Sidney King and Martin Carter and Rory Westmos out of the PPP. And it was only after then that CLR James was able to bring Carter and Burnham together, and then Sidney King joined, and the PNC. So I just wanted to check that piece of history with you. Go ahead.
But that is true, David. You know what is worrisome? You alluded to Ravi Dev. In today's Starbucks News, there's a chorus to Ravi Dev written by a Dr. Randy Prasad, in which he demonizes Burnham, criticizing Annie Ferguson's letter, and goes all over the place. And I couldn't help remembering a statement made by Mark Twain that their lies, damn lies, and statistics, because he quoted some absurd figures which made no sense, and ignored the reality of that time and the fact that his grouping sought to frustrate, sabotage all of the efforts made by Burnham and others. And when you criticize, as he sought to do in his letter, national service intended to deal with our inherited distrust of each other, put in by the Europeans, so that we can boys from the Quarantine, Northwest, Rupini, Georgetown, the coast, Afro, Doglo, Indo, Chino mix, meet together in a controlled environment to work together, learn more of each other, and leave the facility understanding what it means to be Guyanese. That was a magnificent initiative by Burnham that the likes of Ravi Dev and Randy Prasad are now trying to downplay, if not demonize. It is a great pity, and we must resist it and speak the truth, because no one can get over the truth that it is.
And I mean, you're so right. I mean, you know, my generation and the generation after mine, we have to learn to be critical while at the same time acknowledging the role that were played by those with whom we disagreed. And I think it's a quality that these former colonial outposts that we have to learn. You know, if you look across the post-colonial world, and I'm not making excuses for anybody, for Burnham, for Williams, for Gary. I'm not making excuses for anybody. But if you look across the post-colonial world and you look at the challenges that those early leaders had, they had to make some critical decisions. And they made some critical decisions. And in my estimation, and the estimation of those who come from the radical tradition, that they do not move as quickly as possible to consolidate our independence. And so therefore, we were critical of them. But the point is that when you are in the theater of struggle, you are fixated on your immediate goal. But as you move further away from the theater of struggle, you come to see things in more holistic terms. That there is a way in which my generation of radicals didn't see some positive things of the Williamses and the Burnhams and the Manleys and the Barrows. Now, as we are further away from the concourse of ideas and the clash of ideas, we are able to see things that we didn't see when we were locked in struggle. And I always tell people, the fact that the Hamilton Greene and the David Hines could have a civil conversation represents political maturity that I wish some of our friends could learn. Because as a country, we are not going to move forward unless we learn that basic thing about politics. And that is to disagree, sometimes vehemently disagree, but to recognize that we are all in this boat together. I mean, let me bring you to 1970, because I was intrigued by one of your letters. From a small boy in struggle, I heard from people who were opposed to the PNC, including some of my own people, that Burnham chose the 23rd of February
February.
for Republic Day because he wanted something close to his birthday. And I remember before you answer me, because you laid out for us how we all got to 23rd. I remember an old lady during those times meet me and she stopped me. She said, "Boy, you're educated, but don't be an educated fool." And I said, "Miss Ivy, explain to me what you mean." She said, "If Burnham did want matrimony on his birthday, he would have put it on the 20th. He birthday. He put it on the 23rd." And years later, because I dismissed her at that time because I felt strongly with what I was hearing. Later on, I remember, she's now long dead, but later on, I remember I said, "You know, the lady was right. If a man if he's so banal and so full of himself, well, he would have put the thing on his birthday and not the 23rd. And I knew the 23rd was the beginning. Certainly some historians put the beginning of the Berbice 1763 revolution on the 23rd. But the point is, when you are in opposition and you're in the theater, you blank out certain reality in order to get to your immediate goal. But like I said, as you move further away, you now are taking all the factors into consideration. Hamilton Greene, how we got to the 23rd?
Well, first, David, let me say we need that radicalism you talked about badly today. And we have to find some young people, some young David Hines and others with that passion so that they can move the ship forward. Yes, we came in different ships, but today we are in the same boat because the people who brought us here, made us slaves and coolies, are still, in a sense, trying to control things, particularly now that we have all this abundance of oil, gas, and gold. And so, on the Republic, I was present at the meeting in November, the final meeting when the date for independence was set. And when Burnham proposed that there be a clause to allow us to move to Republican status, some of the British officials felt, "Oh, Mr. Burnham, that was not necessary." Some thought it was heresy because they wanted us, for some reason, in our minds, to see Her Gracious Majesty the Queen still, even though she may not have had executive authority, but still as head of state. And people do not recognize the importance and the import of that giant insistence that we had that clause inserted, which said that after 1969, once the parliament agreed, we can move to become a republic, the first in the English-speaking Caribbean, and therefore graciously dispense with the notion that we are somehow still British colonials or even citizens, but that we are citizens of our own country and that we must do what is necessary to vindicate the suffering, the humiliation, particularly our slave ancestors and those who we met here and those who came subsequently. That task is not yet completed, and I hope that people like yourself and myself will consider it a challenge, a necessity to continue so that we find liberation mentally among ourselves, recognizing that a major challenge, as we see in the present government, are among some of our friends, so to speak, who feel that they are part of this new government. And David, let me say this. Look at the composition and the characteristics of the cabinet. It is not easy to decipher who, which cabal controls the resources. And we must tell our friends that, yes, they are ministers, but they're not in control of the gravy. They may be able to control the few hundreds and thousands, but they're not in control of the millions. The natural resources, the czar of oil and gas, the president. And this is something we need to discuss on one of your programs so that our kith and kin could understand that they must not sell their birthright for a mess of pottage.
For a mess of pottage. So, Hammy, how did you all arrive at the date for the 23rd for Republic?
It was the day that coffee struck at Magdalenenburg, and in fact, there were free men on the 23rd of February. And at the conference, I'll tell you something else. Burnham wanted our independence date to be February 23rd, but the British said that it was too close because remember, this is November, mid-November, to put in place the arrangements to have independence in February. Degar wanted our independence date to be August the 1st. Our delegation said we did not want a date, as Degar said, when the slaves were freed by a certificate from the old master in England. We wanted a date that certified the struggle of the ancestors. And that is how we came on the 23rd of February. And to find a compromise between the 23rd of February and the 1st of August, they looked at the calendar and brought one British official said, well, let's have the 24th of May. But Burnham was so sharp, so keen, even before the words were out of the gentleman's mouth, he said, that's the Queen's official birthday. And so we settled for the 26th of May, which also was a date when we had an advanced constitution sometime at the end of the 19th century. So briefly, that's the story.
That's the story. And so the 23rd was always on Burnham's mind since independence.
Oh, yes, that's when the boys struck at Magdalenenburg.
Yes.
And were in fact freed.
Hamilton, this charge that Burnham was driven solely by personal ambition. I know it's a ridiculous proposition, but I will still ask you to comment on it.
Well, Burnham had the ability to do what was necessary, taking into account extant circumstances, the world as it was, and to ensure that the objective of independence, economic independence, educating our people, removing them from the clutches of the old European beliefs were achieved. I don't know that Burnham had personal ambitions. Burnham had a passion to make Guyana a wholesome place so that we can advance and, as I said earlier, vindicate the sufferings of our noble ancestors.
Hamilton Greene there speaking on that contentious issue that Burnham was driven by personal ambition, and so his achievements should not be seen in a progressive context. Hammy, you have spent a long time in politics, way back in the 1950s, coming forward to the present. I always heard when I was a young man in the WPA and in the villages, you go and people say, well, you know, Hamilton Greene is a real people's man in the Burnham government. Anybody could go in the office and meet him and so on. And so there were always these different narratives, as there were different narratives about Burnham, the different narratives about Hamilton Greene. And I've later on talked to people who work very, very closely with you, who confirmed when you were a minister and you acted in ways that cut out a lot of the bureaucracy between the minister and the people. What drove you to adopt that praxis in carrying out your job as a government minister?
Well, first, David, I had a distaste for people in the public service who set out to frustrate ordinary people. And that's why they call me Action Green. Once, when I was Minister of Health, Housing and Labor, some folks came in from St. Cuthbert's Mission, traveling all day. It was a Friday afternoon. I remember it distinctly. They arrived at about a few minutes after 4. The officers were still at their desks. And these 2 senior officers told the folks, well, we can't deal with this after 4. You have to come back on Monday. When I heard it, I was furious and instructed them to take the people's matter up and deal with it expeditiously. As a result, the next week, I bundled a number of senior officers into 2 or 3 jeeps and had them drive, I was present, from Georgetown through the trail to St. Cuthbert's Mission. During the journey, one of the chaps vomited because it was so rough. And when we got back to Georgetown, they came and apologized to me and said, Comrade Minister, we'll never turn people away if they come a few minutes late, particularly those who come from the far-flung areas. And the other thing is that Burnham had a way, as a good general, to identify different people for different assignments. When I became General Secretary of the party needed a de facto General Secretary. I was unmarried, had no children, didn't depend on the party for money because my mother was a political activist and she supported me, provided me with the wherewithal, including a vehicle. And this is why I was able to bring the party out of the doldrums, out of the clutches of the fire of the PPP and the trained terrorists to a position where we linked with the GAR and got into office in 1964. So that is a short answer, but that paints a picture of what you're trying to see.
You grew up in Albistown, right?
Uh, I grew up in Charleston, really, but I regard Charleston or Boystown as one area.
The
My,
same.
my, no, my father had a drugstore in Boystown.
Uh-huh.
I grew up in House Street, which is just four corners away. And thanks to my mother, she never disallowed me from mixing with the ordinary people in Charleston or Boystown. And my father was an enormous man. He started the first indigenous bank in this country. When you come to my home, I'll show you one of the ledgers which I saved, the People's Benefit Scheme, because he was extremely honest, and people from the Dharamshala, from the Repentance area, would bring money to him. And this is, you remember, before and during the war days, and leave it in paper and cloth. So he started this bank, the first indigenous bank. And that, in fact, helped to mold my character because I got to love and appreciate the ordinary people. One of the first people who opened an account was Rek Mukay's mother, an Indo-Guyanese, a very charming lady. And that's my background, all Boystown, Charlestown. And when I got to Queen's College, some of the boys, I remember Drake, for example, who lived in Bar Street, All Boystown, was so ashamed of being an All Boystown resident. When he applied to join a certain club, he gave his address as Bar Street Kitty. But I was always proud of myself. I never had a difficulty admitting. And this is why I was able to get 98% of the votes in 1994. And this Hoyt didn't understand from that Charleston or Boystown, Repentance area alone.
Hamilton Greene here giving us some insight into his own activism, mixing it with some insight into Burnham. Hammy, as you look back at those early years after independence, and you're a historian, among other things, and as you put that broad gaze on our Caribbean and the struggle for Caribbean integration after the breakup of the Federation, which the Jagan government did not take Guyana into, and Sidney King and others left, primarily because Jagan refused to take Guyana into the Federation. But you were there as Burnham and Barrow in particular tried to resuscitate. You had a little aid, Carifta, and eventually CARICOM. And so you interfaced with leaders from the wider Caribbean. How did that experience of interfacing with your brothers and sisters in other countries facing similar issues like ours in Guyana, how did that help you all in terms of shaping policy during that era?
Well, let me comment on two issues. One, Jagan's apparent reluctance, aversion, hostility to Caribbean Federation. Take your pick. There, at that time, was already a tincture, and I'm using my words very carefully, of race. I said Chetty was not a racist, but within his group and those who advised him, I spoke to some of them at that time as a youngster. They felt that with the Federation, Barbados, Antigua, Jamaica, except for Trinidad, only Guyana carried Indo and Indo-Guyanese population. So that was my take. I may be wrong, but that was my impression. because Chetty gave no lucid explanation why he was unhappy or unafraid to proceed with the federation. The other aspect of your question is that, yes, Burnham was by a long, long stretch a Caribbean man. And in 1965, he, Byrd, and Barrow met at Dixon Bay in Antigua before any of them had independence, at a time when the other chaps were afraid to talk seriously about a union for fear of annoying the US and the UK governments. But as I say, the three great Bs, Vere, Byrd, uh, Barrow, and Forbes Burnham, met at Dickinson Bay and sowed the seeds for what we know today to be CARICOM.
What we know today to be CARICOM, which was after that meeting, we had the Caribbean Free Trade Area, CARIFTA, and
Correct.
then CARICOM, the Treaty of Chaguaramas in 1973, when Burnham Manley by then had come to power in 1972. Barrow and the great Eric Williams signed that treaty. Before you all even got to that, normalization of relations with Cuba, difficult within the context of the Cold War, but it was done by the same four leaders. You care to comment on that?
Well, first of all, to deal with the viciousness and the harm that is being done to countries like Guyana during the Cold War, even before Gorbachev dismantled the Soviet Union, Burnham understood that the friendship with Chetty Jagan was necessary. And you probably heard this before. Elvin McDavid and myself had secret talks, and the idea was to bring those two titans together in the interests of a cohesive and strong Guyana, to unite not only the ethnic groups, but to ensure we say to the rest of the world, we are at one, and we will ensure that our natural resources are used primarily for the benefit of Guyanese. There were two difficulties. One, and I haven't written my book yet, I believe that either Mrs. Jagan or somebody else recognized that Burnham was a brilliant man and felt that any proposal or arrangement made between himself and Chetty and those who facilitated the coming together, that Burnham had some trick up his sleeve. Years after, when I was mayor, Mrs. Jagan asked me if it is true that Burnham had mystical powers and walked with a seed in his pocket. This is gospel true. I can swear to that conversation I had with Mrs. Jagan. And perhaps that disallowed the two men getting together in the interests of this country. And even after Burnham's demise, I thought it necessary to find a propension, a coming together with Chetty. And Joey is alive. Joey can attest to what I'm about to say. Joey Jagan brought his father to my house here in Lodge. But Desmond Hoyt, who was present at the time, felt something was Wrong. I say no more this time, and therefore did not relish the idea of the companionship that I was trying to reestablish between Chedi Jagan and the leadership of the People's National Congress. Joy Jagan's alive. Joy Jagan can attest to his father coming here and us talking.
Hamilton Greene there taking us behind the scenes. Hammy, by the time the APNU was formed by the WPA and the PNC, you were not part of the formal leadership of the PNC, but you obviously would have been consulted on the wisdom or lack of wisdom of such a move by young Robert Corbyn at the time, who I thought had the courage to go in that direction. I know there were several people in the PNC leadership who didn't want him to go in that direction of seeking an alliance with the WPA. What was your view at the time? And looking back, do you think it was a good move?
I always felt that some arrangement with the WPA was an absolute necessity. As you know, I grew up in Charlestown, and Roger attended St. Stephen's School. I knew of him. And I remember distinctly that Burnham tried to get my cousin, Omowali is my first cousin. You knew that?
Yes, Omowali? Yes.
He's my first cousin.
Your cousin Walter Greene, yes.
Yeah. He is my uncle's son.
Uh-huh.
My father is the elder of the brothers.
Uh-huh.
But I'm not too sure what happened. But to answer your question, yes, I always felt it was necessary to have elements of the WPA work with us in the national interest.
Yes, and Hoyt himself, when the WPA proposed in 1990 that while we were waiting on them to get the new electoral arrangements for the new election, which eventually happened in 1992, the WPA had proposed to the PPP that we form a national government with Hoyt as president, since he was the sitting president, but a national government with the three parties, and the PPP would have none of it. But they said we could have gone and could have spoken to the PNC, which we did, and Hoyt agreed to such a government, and the PPP rejected it. Another piece of history, another moment when we could have come together and brought our country together. Another opportunity was missed because the PPP sensed that it could have won the 1992 election and so did not embrace a government of national unity. Hammy, you had some problems with that arrangement with Jimmy Carter, leading up to the 1992 elections. What were your fundamental issues?
First, David, because of my mother's education, brainwashing of her son Hamilton, I began with a distrust for an American from the Deep South. My mother lived in the United States, had friendships with white people from the North who she loved, but she taught me not to distrust those chaps from the Deep South, because for them, as she told me, those of us with melanin and kinky hair were always and will always be second class, third class citizens. So when Desmond Hoyt brought Carter here, or Carter came, I'm not too sure which is correct, I said to him, do not entertain Jimmy Carter, because Carter's position, his philosophy, his ideology is for what was called regime change. Desmond didn't seem to understand that, and that is where we crossed swords. Because I said to him, if anything is wrong with the electoral system, let us look at it and correct it. But to have as happened, you know what irritated me? I was in Queenstown selling munition. And while I was passing by Joan Granger's shop, she had selling black pudding at the time, was Saturday morning. I learned that Jimmy Carter, using the radio, announced that we will no longer be using the overseas voters list. I was livid. And Robert Corbyn, who was nearby, will tell you how I felt. And I said, I didn't understand Desmond Hoyt. In politics, you don't give up something that can be to your benefit. That is why one of my colleagues called me schoolboy subsequently. And in fact, on a visit to Atlanta sometime later, Carter said he was glad to meet me because he never met me in Guyana. I was never allowed to meet him. And I don't want to speak ill of Hoyt or anybody else because I had a spiritual vision. I did a program on the TV. On the I recorded the program on the Friday, I think, and said, I forgive all those who did me something wrong. I had him in mind, and he was no longer wrong, I think 48 hours after.
Hamilton Greene there, reminiscing. Hammy, when Burnham passed away in 1985, and I know it's difficult sometimes to speak about yourself and that, but when Burnham passed away in 1985, I know of no political person, including people on the ground, who felt that it was not your turn to take over the leadership of the PNC. Many of us, I know many of us in the WPA were shocked that Hoyt was given that nod. As you look back on that period, would you say that you were treated badly?
I would say I was too decent. I didn't want to break the party. And those who are party members would recall that the Congress in 1985 was held up for about 2 hours because Desmond Hoyt, Tolmy Reid and myself were locked in a discussion in Hoyt's office. And later, before that, Tolmy Reid came to my house and persuaded me not to fight Hoyt at the Congress because it would break the party. And I extracted certain conditions. One, that I be made prime minister, and that he mustn't tell me what to do and what not to do. But a lot of people felt I was not smart because I don't think Hoyt could have beaten me at that Congress.
Hamilton Greene, you heard it here on Politics 101. I know Hammy has always been, quite rightly, been very careful about that period because, you know, often these things can take on wings of their own. But it's the most forthright I've heard you on this subject. And it is something that is fascinating. Those of us who do political history always are fascinated by what happened, because those moments can determine what direction a country would go into. We know Hoyt became the president, and Guyana embraced the early stages of structural adjustment, to the point where Mr. Hoyt became known as Desmond Prasad. I think in a real structural way, the IMF World Bank conditionalities really begun the swift descent of African Guyanese out of the economic mainstream, because those IMF conditionalities really worked against African Guyanese. And I remember, before you come in 1979, Burnham rejected the IMF conditionality. He said it's a recipe for riot. I remember that very well as a young man. But comment on that IMF World Bank intervention there between 85 and 92. Were you in favor of them?
On paper, Hoyt's economic recovery program was good. But at a political level, you don't listen to the World Bank and the IMF and rush to make those changes, ignoring the fact that you're building the other people, the political opposition, and in fact, weakening your political base and not doing things that will immediately benefit your supporters. The fact that, for whatever reason, we have a society, or we had or still have a society that is not only fragmented, but is polarized. And again, Hoyt and I fell out on those issues. And as is the case of Carter, he kept me away from those discussions. Because, again, I have inborn distrust, as I said, thanks to my mother and other people, for those people who come to manipulate us, particularly Black people, as we've seen in parts of Africa and elsewhere, to tell us what is right and what is wrong. And this was my difficulty I had with you, Desmond Hoyt. And as I said,
Hamilton Greene, go ahead.
I never met Carter until I was at Atlanta on another mission.
Was kept away from these crucial decisions. Hami, as we go out tonight, I have to get you in more often for these sessions, because I think what you bring to bear here is the perspective of the insider, really locating what happened, not in theorization, but in the actual fact of being there. I mean, you're still pounding the pavements, still out there, trying to rally our people, still dealing with what you dealt with when you first got into politics in the 1950s. What lessons, apart from your personal example of perseverance, what lessons are there for the younger people who are bereft of that large historical gaze?
First, young people must understand the reality of the world in which we live. Indo-Guyanese, Amerindian Guyanese, Afro-Guyanese, whatever. That the mindset of those who plundered us physically, as far as slaves are concerned, and plundered our resources, they are still alive and well. And that which we take with a grain of salt, the things they tell us. I worry, for example, when I hear our president making speeches on oil and gas. I get the impression that he's reading from a draft prepared by the other people. And this is a sad situation. And I say to our young people, all of them, that we must work together to ensure that we are the main beneficiaries of this great bounty that the Creator, whatever you believe in, has bestowed upon Guyana. And don't take things for granted. We have no floods, no natural disasters. The oil coming up there is enough to feed every child. In this community where I live, on a daily basis, tears come to my eyes sometimes when some parents can't afford the bus fare and lunch kit, lunch money for the children. I was speaking with Aubrey Norton on Saturday, and we shared an experience of opening an Afro-Guyanese lunch kit, and there was nothing inside. Child taking the kid to school as a show. We've got to ensure that the oligarchy stop sharing this abundance of money to a few families and that it trickles down to the ordinary people in our villages, in our communities, in a way that we can benefit. And the first thing, and I told this to, I don't want to call his name, a senior PPP minister, Afro-Guyanese, that all they need to do is follow the footprints of Forbes Bonham, make education free from university, from kindergarten to university, so that every child has an opportunity. Improve and increase the training facilities for health workers or educational workers. Ensure that culture and sport get a top billing and not just spending money foolishly. Up to now, after 23 years in government, we are still satisfied at Olympics with a bronze medal. In cricket, if you know the story of Clive Lloyd and Burnham Magic,
I know that quite well.
Huh?
I said I know it quite well.
Right.
The 1973 intervention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what we need to do, and my message to our young people, is to avoid using these electronic devices for foolishness, because the cell phones, the iPads have enough information stored to help them with their education. But too many of them are not utilizing those things properly. In fact, another problem is that we have parents who aren't parents. It's a very serious matter. And I suggest that people like yourself, David, do programs on 101 to appeal to young parents, to tell them what it is to be a parent, a mother and a father, what sacrifices they need to make so that the children can emerge in a highly technological environment, not being, as Jagan once said of Black people, at the bottom of the ladder. This is what we must strive to do over the next few years.
Thank you very much, Hami, for coming on, and We spent the last hour and a half, and the audience has remained with us, although there are other programs that started at 8 o'clock, but certainly they paid rapt attention. And as I said, from time to time, I'm going to bring you in to link the past with the present, and to talk about your own experiences, one way or the other. Certainly, you've added some value, a lot of value to our program and our discourse. Thank you very much, my brother.
Before I close, thank my special wife, Dr. Jennifer Basdeo Greene, for being my chief architect and my chief technician, because I'm a bit of a technological barbarian. I want to thank her publicly. And
Yes.
she's an unpaid servant.
Thank you, and I would like to echo that and to thank Dr. Basdeo Greene for helping to have Mr. Greene appear on these programs. And we often, we the men in politics, often forget the role that women play in our homes, in our personal relationships, and of course in the political arena. It's something that doesn't roll from our tongue like butter from a hot frying pan. It comes out sometime, but it needs to roll off our tongues. Let's big up our women who continue to really hold our society, our communities, and our country together. They bore the burden on the plantation.
They're the real champions.
The real champions. Thank you very much, Ami, and thank you very much, Dr. Basdeo Greene.
Enjoy the rest of the evening. Thanks a lot.
Hamilton Greene there, bringing to bear his wisdom. I'm sure that you would have learned one or two things. I learned quite a lot tonight from reminiscing with Hamilton Greene. I'll see you all tomorrow. Be good to yourselves. Do something political. Do something political. There is always something to be done, C.L.R. James says. There is always something to be done. He also said, every cook can govern. Wherever you are, whatever you do, know that you're contributing to the struggle. And ultimately, when that small axe cuts down that big tree, your contribution would be part of that history, that moment, that victory.